Hey, Mendel here with another guest episode that we are excited to share with you. In this piece, originally broadcast in 2 unabridged parts on The Wind, producer Eleanor is taking us on a pilgrimage in honor of, and in tribute to, that most collective monarch, the monarch butterfly. And through those butterfly migrants, tells a story of scale, agency, and spiritual offering in a changing world. Pack your bags, prepare your gifts, and you're off.
The Merry Monarchs, an audio tour for butterflies.
Entering internet chat. Input question 2:31 a.m. User Eleanor Qual.
Q. How do I talk to butterflies? Dear forum. I'm a human. Yes? Human. I am normal. I would like to talk to the butterflies, particularly the most important ones, which, if you go by names, importance, inheritance, social ranking, hereditary peerage, cross-reference with rarity equals monarch butterflies. How do I talk to them? I have essential questions about A. Their feelings on bees, their feelings on the butterflies that pretend to be them. B. Their feelings on sorrow. C. How to cross mountain ranges. How? Why?
A.
Alexa, salesperson, 2018 to present. Have you ever chased a butterfly just to see where it goes? 'Cause I have. It wasn't very interesting. They are kind of dumb and fly in circles a lot.
A. Can we return to the monarch butterflies? I have a lot of questions for the butterflies. A lot more. Yes?
Yes.
Who here is that butterfly? Who among you is the one who captured him? Who is the cotton ball and who is the pin? Are you the jar? No one thinks they are. Everybody thinks they are the butterfly. So do I. So do I.
Hey. Welcome, butterflies. Welcome, jars. You heard my voice asking the internet for help, and like it usually does, it helped both not at all and too much simultaneously. I know I'm not a butterfly. I am a jar. I have a friend who would like to be reincarnated as a glass jar, so I think I have the connections for it. Over the next few months, compressed into minutes, we will be preparing for the Western Monarchs' migration from the north of Idaho and the foothills of the Rockies to the coast of California, with an audio and physical pilgrimage. Welcome to the Merry Monarch migration. Maybe this is a good time for a disclaimer. Firstly, I don't know if I can call monarch butterflies merry. If Werner Herzog is to be believed, maybe the joyful, light flight of butterflies is actually a series of desperate efforts to survive, while they scream silently and continuously. Or they could be a bag of liquid DNA that flaps around for a few weeks or months a year. This podcast episode takes the position of some truth in between. Secondly, I'm not an expert on butterflies. Very far from it. I am someone sitting at home on the internet. But I aspire to and have attempted biological accuracy through interviews and from referencing the latest publicly available research. And I use that research to answer both biological and spiritual questions. Nevertheless, to all the biologists and entomologists out there, if I am wrong, if I make errors,
please submit a strongly worded complaint at www.futureecologies.net.
Here we go.
Here in California, butterfly lovers are all aflutter over the return of the magnificent migrating monarch butterflies.
The monarch butterfly. 1, 2, a bunch.
A journey spanning thousands of miles across the sky is producing wonderment.
It's pretty incredible.
An estimated 200,000 are spending the winter here in California.
Now, listen. That's the sound of butterflies. The sound of millions of butterflies fluttering.
In cool weather, the monarchs cluster in trees, only flying off to feed and pollinate when temperatures rise.
As they hang out, they're trying to just hold their energy and not move as much as they don't have to, because they're just trying to survive the winter.
Conserving energy for spring when it's time to reproduce. Future generations will then fly to other western states for the summer before making the long journey back to California next winter.
Western monarch butterflies wintering along the West Coast declined to all-time low numbers last year, dipping to fewer than 2,000.
And they were thought to be on the verge of extinction.
Some of the biggest factors that are impacting monarch populations are insecticides as well as habitat loss.
This season, the population bounced back.
So is there a big comeback?
I think it's way too early to tell, and we'll need a few years of decent numbers in order to see if this is really a comeback.
There are a lot more questions that news reports like this one don't answer, which we will get to and try to answer during the preparation to create audio and physical stops for the monarch butterflies, to spur them on for their next great western migration, which will happen in
September to October 2024.
I have a theory that to counteract the helplessness and disengagement of the onslaught of information, that helplessness of knowing just enough to be helpless, and disengaging from action that feels utterly futile as everything feels like it is breaking down. Instead, we all choose one subject, like a mineral ore, or a square mile of land, or a mammal, or an insect. And that's what each person subscribes to care about far too much. And we'll be closer to something tangible like the Earth, and it will be harder for the disappearing species and plants and things to slip through the gaps in our attention and vision and disappear. We will no longer have that loneliness of being estranged from the land while it feels like everything disappears or dies around us. Maybe not. It's hard not to feel the power of scale, that many small gestures may accumulate to not much and may be completely overrun by some economic move, highway straightening project, political sea change, new natural mineral demand, great flood, small flood, that wipes out all of, say, just in 2022, the Cape Verde giant skink, butterfly splitfin, Maui upland damselfly, Kerr's noctoid moth, Xerxes blue butterfly, chestnut Sir David's long-beaked echidna. Maybe we will know why they are gone, but maybe not. But we'll definitely feel the loss as part of the accumulation of losses after whatever the crossing point was, where it felt like all the systems we've lived alongside and in started really breaking down. The monarch butterfly populations, both east and west, were relatively robust until a major population crash that occurred in the early 2000s. That's the chart you always see, of their population numbers diving off the proverbial cliff in 2001. It turns out that until then, Despite the transformation of land into agriculture and cornfields and dams and houses and CVSs and CVS parking lots and old CVSs that are only haunted by the spirit of Halloween once a year, up until then, the Monarchs were doing sort of okay. There aren't numbers from the Monarch migration in 1951, or 1851 for that matter, but it turned out they were simpatico with cornfields and CVSs, because the plant they need to reproduce, the plant that gives them their bright orange color and zesty poison flavor, the milkweed, makes greatest headway in areas that have been disturbed, like dug up. So, if anything, all the digging of the settlers was a gift, and the monarch butterflies proliferated. This isn't the case for all milkweed varieties, but according to a study done in the 1990s, the amount of milkweed in corn and soy fields was sufficient to support more butterflies per acre than any other habitat, including roadsides, wildlands, and conservation reserve, for reasons we did not understand. And for reasons we didn't understand at the time, big reasons that we understand now. When the herbicide-tolerant, Roundup-ready GMO corn and soybean crops were introduced in the late 1990s and early 2000s, 20% of central monarch habitat was eradicated. And when in 2006 Congress passed the biofuel bill and the price of corn and soybeans made a permanent profitable jump, then the Roundup-showered fields started being planted right up to the edge of the road, and, counting the loss of rangelands, conservation land, and the adding of many new houses and CVSs, over 50 million acres were added to no butterfly land.
We did a number of interesting things in this country that both reduced monarchs and enabled monarchs.
This is one of the preeminent experts in North American monarch biology.
Hi, I'm Chip Taylor. I'm for Monarch Watch at the University of Kansas. We started our program in 1992 and just had our 30-year celebration.
You'll hear his voice throughout this episode.
There's a long story about opening up the habitat that has facilitated the butterfly, and then at the same time we've taken away a lot of habitat because we've created these big open spaces where there's no habitat. We've created these big agricultural fragments, which are just enormous fragments with virtually no flowers and no milkweeds, none of the resources the butterflies need.
The western monarchs, they had the same population decline as the eastern monarchs in the early 2000s, didn't they? Or was it a different phenomenon?
Where agriculture conflicts with monarchs in the west, there's much more of a pesticide problem. And there's much more of an entanglement of agriculture and monarchs early in the spring than there is any other time, because they have to migrate through areas where there's a lot of pesticide usage. And they are also moving through areas in the Central Valley where there's relatively little milkweed. But they've got to get through those areas to get to the Sierras to the east and to get into Nevada and get into those Intermountain West areas. And they also have to go north into the northwest.
So if the priority for the eastern monarchs is to restore as much of the habitat as possible, what would the priority be for the western monarchs?
Well, that certainly depends on who you talk to. From my standpoint, there's every reason to restore a lot of the native milkweeds if you can. And one of the difficulties with the western milkweeds is that they're much more difficult to restore than restoring plants in the east. The eastern milkweeds are easier to work with. Western milkweeds are harder to get seeds from, harder to grow, harder to keep established, partly because you've got drought conditions a lot of the time, and partly because we just don't know enough about them. There are efforts to learn a lot more about the western milkweeds, but they are definitely more difficult to work with.
So, in this particular case, you have to ask whether an individual, you or me, and all the other individuals combined can plant enough milkweed to make up for 50 million acres of habitat loss, to give the monarch butterflies even a chance against every other looming problem that they're facing and what that really means and what any of this. I'm doing this anyway. Doing this pilgrimage, trying to connect with the butterflies physically, spiritually, ecumenically, biologically. But if we lose the monarch migration, we lose a fundamental connection with natural phenomena that we have so few examples of now. A spiritual and personal connection. of seeing them travel hundreds of miles in the west and thousands in the east, and many of the butterflies dying just as they get to their overwintering grounds. We would lose a demonstration of life force. Maybe this is just enough fiction to keep me going and feeling a connection with ecology and geology and whatever, and when that fails, well, I guess I'll finally get a job. The physio audio tour will contain 5 stops. On each of the stops, initially you will also hear what the butterflies would hear. My attempts to communicate with them in ultrasound and give them succor in their journey, like medieval pilgrimages. So what they'll need: nectar, bright, handsome, jolly colors, water, salt, blood, wayfinding. We'll get more into that later. Stop 1. River Fork Ranch. In August 2021, I went with Phil Corbett to the River Fork Ranch outside Carson City, Nevada, traditional land of the Washoe tribe.
So, can you first introduce yourself and say where we're standing right now?
Sure. So my name is Lori Leonard, and I work for the Nature Conservancy as a River Fork Ranch Preserve Manager. So we are at the River Fork Ranch, which is a little over an 800-acre preserve. And it's located in the Carson Valley, just outside of the little town of Genoa, which was the first settlement in the state of Nevada.
Since we're standing right here, can you describe what the River Fork Ranch looks like?
Sure. The River Fork Ranch Preserve it's a pretty stunning view that's located within the Carson Valley, which is a pretty wide valley. And the preserve itself is located just right at the base of the Sierra Nevada mountain range.
So you said maybe start over here?
Sure. So what we've tried to do here is highlight different native plants that people can grow that also are really good for native pollinators. One of those insects is the monarch butterfly. And so the monarch butterfly populations have really been in pretty serious decline for quite some time now. There's 2 different general populations. There's an east population, which they overwinter down in Mexico, and they typically have 4 different generations within one season. They require the milkweed species exclusively for them to lay their eggs. And when the larvae then get into that next phase, they'll eat the leaves of the milkweed species. So these are really critical for them in each of these different locations. So again, the eastern population can go from Mexico, their overwintering location, some all the way up to Canada. Then the western population, there's overwintering grounds along the California coast. And similarly, they have, 3 to 4 generations where they're migrating throughout their season. And so again, both populations require milkweed for their existence. So we try to showcase, we've got a couple of different native milkweeds here. It's showy milkweed and threadleaf or thinleaf milkweed. And so we just encourage, people to plant them on their property so we all can kind of do our part to sort of help, the monarchs, and then that in turn helps a lot of different pollinator species too.
Is that part of the decline with monarchs right now? Is that there's less milkweed?
That is one of the concerns. There's a lot more monocultures and a lot more development, so it's one of the things that they think is contributing to the decline in species.
Mm-hmm. And like you said, the center advocates for people just growing this in their own yard.
Yeah, absolutely. You can identify yourself once you plant and get some of those milkweed plants planted, you can declare your space a monarch way station, they call them. You know, a location where monarchs can travel to in their migratory route. So at the preserve, there's been a couple of monarchs that were tagged here that were found in the Pacific Grove area of California. So again, that's along the coast. So that was pretty exciting.
But what we do not know about the western monarch butterfly is abundant. Here's Dr. Chip Taylor again. And what about with the western monarch? Can you tell me more about the flight paths and where their origins are?
As far as the West is concerned, nobody really knows the pathways. We know that there are two areas of origin for butterflies that get to the California coast. One is northwestern states, Oregon, Washington, Idaho, and then to a little extent Utah. But there is also the Intermountain West, which would include part of Utah. So you get Nevada, you've got Utah, you've got western Colorado, you probably have parts of northern Arizona, maybe even parts of New Mexico, all of which contribute to the West Coast populations. So you've got these two origins in the West, and they seem to differ from year to year because the climates are different in these places, and the parent origins of the butterflies are different that start the population. We really don't have a good understanding of where these butterflies come from. I mean, we're talking about the Intermountain West. We're talking about a vast, vast area where there aren't a lot of human beings. So we don't have a really good grip on where the monarchs are produced in that area. And then you go to the Northwest, and it's pretty easy to identify where the milkweeds are. They're in all of the agricultural areas along the rivers, a few meadows here and there. But you can identify most of the stuff in the northwestern areas, so we know pretty much where those butterflies are coming from. But we don't know much about the Intermountain West. So, you know, and we certainly have no idea how those things have changed through time. I mean, there simply is no data.
But there are many things we do now have the answer to. The fundamental why. Because, essentially, at core, the migration is biological drive. The yearly migration allows the butterflies to escape freezing temperatures. The dying host plants, both the pollinated plants that they feed on and the milkweed that is essential to their reproduction and medicinal sustenance. And to escape virulent parasites that are controlled with the die-off of their host plants. And we also now know how the hell they navigate so far every year. 3,000 miles in the eastern migration and around 500 in most of the west. And how they know instinctively how to return to very few groves dispersed down the coast of California, even when some of their preceding generations encounter such environmental and situational cataclysms that they're unable to make it to these select microclimates with the conditions for winter survival. To quote the article Demystifying Monarch Butterfly Migration by Stephen M. Repart and Jacobus C. DeRoda, published in the National Library of Medicine,
monarchs use a bidirectional time-compensated sun compass for orientation, which is based on a time-compensating circadian clock that resides in the antennae, and which has a distinctive molecular mechanism. In overcast conditions, migrants can also use a light-dependent inclination magnetic compass. Additional environmental features, including atmospheric conditions, geological barriers, and social interactions, likely augment navigation.
This faculty works even if they're relocated to a different longitude in the migration zone. They're rapidly able to reorient themselves, integrating celestial and magnetic information to continue migrating along the new vector, and sometimes the timing of their arrival aligns exactly with celestial events. Perhaps this is part of our wonder at the monarch migration. The monarch's bodies bewilder us, the opposite of technological travel we aspire to in magnet rails and hyperloops. Yet counterintuitively, they can travel so far without any of the recourses we have to technology, with only an ancient sense of radar in such frail bodies. Do we have a confusion, a type of jealousy that we have no genetic memory like butterflies, birds in flight, spiders weaving, that we were born helpless and ugly? Yet that magnetic compass of the monarchs can disappear if they're removed from the migration. Take them in and raise them, and past 2 generations they lose that essential imperative. They become static. But back to the River Fork Ranch. A year and a half later, I am here with my bundle of souvenirs to plant like seeds along this part of the Carson River where they pass and cross the mountains. We have some secrets written in human language that will be buried along the river under symbolic mounds. What else? We have miniatures of the wings of grandfather and grandmother butterflies, and we'll hang these here, here, and here from the sagebrush. And here are some devotional scapular kind of pouches to hang among them. Here are some prayer books, prayers written not only in sense but also in verses, and they have blank pages in them, so here's a desk to write on. So, there you go. A loving and symbolic of useless beginning. As with all symbols, it represents something else that may not be present. Something immaterial. The immaterial caught in the material to send them over the mountains.
How do you feel?
How do you feel?
Overshadowed. Looking at the mountains.
Which mountain is that one there?
That one? That is Job's Peak, and right next to it is Job's Sister. Yeah, there's a lake at the base of Job's Sister called Star Lake.
Did you know monarch butterflies were first observed and written about in 1857?
No.
This is from the Journal of the Lepidopterist Society from 1995. Understanding and...
You brought that here?
Understanding and Misunderstanding the Migration of the Monarch Butterfly, Nymphalidae, in North America, 1857 to 1995, by Lincoln P. Brower, Department of Zoology, University of Florida. Do you want to hear it?
Yes, I do.
Aside from a possible sighting of monarchs migrating in eastern Mexico during one of Christopher Columbus's expeditions, D. Urban, 1857, was apparently the first to report a migration of monarch butterflies. He described the butterflies appearing in the Mississippi Valley in such vast numbers as to darken the air by the clouds of them. During September 1867 in southwestern Iowa, Allen, in Scudder and Allen, 1869, described monarchs gathering in several groves of trees bordering the prairie, in such vast numbers on the lee sides of trees, and particularly on the lower branches, as almost to hide the foliage, and give to the trees their own peculiar color. Although this clustering behavior was initially interpreted as a means of avoiding strong prairie winds, it soon became evident that it was associated with large southward movements of monarchs in the fall. Should I keep going?
Nah.
Yeah.
A lot of geese out today.
They brought their trumpets. Stop 2. Mountaintop Roost, Sierra Nevadas.
Eleanor, where are we?
Well, we're in the western Sierra Nevada mountains, around at about...
What can you see from up here?
What can you see from up here?
Okay, so right now we're mostly looking down. I can see the snow-capped Sierra stretching far into the distance. I can see some valleys, a couple creek valleys, and I can see a little stand of lodgepole pines just on the saddle below us. What do you see?
Yeah, same. It does seem unbelievable that anyone or anything can just flap their way over the Sierras. My truck couldn't make it over the pass, but supposedly they make it. But Monarchs will hold on to whatever they can take a rest on, so if that includes getting a ride over, they'll take it. I saw them in a film getting a ride, 10 of them, south, on a tugboat, across the Great Lake Michigan, which was perhaps an overwrought metaphor, but an effective technique. But without a truck or a tugboat, the Monarchs disappear on the eastern side of the Sierras and reappear in the west. And we know that not just because they turn up, but because insect ecologists and all their allies catch monarchs, to set an example, and stick a sticker on their wings. But we're not here to sticker butterflies. We're here to sing ho for the butterflies and try to boost them across the mountains if they should so need.
What is this?
So, we have here this dense egg, woven of grapevines and twine, which interested cyclists can wear as a kind of backpack. Ideally, each day you stuff the insides afresh with whatever wildflowers and grasses are local, so the monarchs can get in and rest, drink, and eat as they would in the litter of a pilgrim of highest luxury.
A butterfly backpack habitat. Is that giving them an advantage?
Like an unfair advantage?
Unfair? Like in the balance? Meaning...
Yeah, exactly. I don't know. Maybe it will ease the burden of one or two, just as a seahorse might hold on to a piece of seaweed as the tide washes in and out. It is a bit hefty. Maybe I should have just made a really spiky but soft t-shirt which would work in a low to medium wind for all manner of insects to cling to. But for now, since we've stopped here, we've sent up bright kites in the most desirable colors to monarch vision as a form of adulation and maybe inspiration that one day in the future perhaps we could have superfauna again if future monarchs grow to several feet in wingspan. I'm not sure if you can convince butterflies or any animal to evolve though, even if there's something in it for them.
What's in it for them?
Oh look, your line is getting tangled.
Yeah. The wind is very variable today. Oh, jeez.
Of course, it would be ideal if we could convince monarchs to evolve to their direct benefit. If they could increase the bodily temperature they need to overwinter successfully, 55 degrees Fahrenheit, by the mean temperature increase caused by climate change, 2 degrees Fahrenheit, so they can stay in reproductive diapause and don't break up and begin their migration back north and east before milkweed begins to grow and flower in spring. Or if they can learn to reproduce and dine heartily on the corn, soy, and other crops that displace their habitat, and then take the milkweed toxins that give them their color, inedibility, and medicine, opportunely, that is, where they may. They can learn, like the bees in Switzerland, to absorb and process herbicides and other xenobiotics, man-made biotics, that are being picked up by insects and affecting metabolism and fecundity in unknowable ways and scale. They could learn to cling to trees with an unbreakable grip, a grip stronger than the lion tamer submission grip of WWE fame, stronger than a steel vise, stronger than a hurricane so they can survive our increasing incidence of catastrophic storms. Transformative evolution is possible, of course. That's how we have butterflies. As ancestral moths developed tube-like mouthparts, capable of sucking up sap and water, The earliest butterflies began flying during the day, when flowers are open, and exchange the brown livery of moths for a palette of bright colors. But this type of change takes time, and a time that is now a cascade of change. I asked Dr. Chip Taylor about their limits, who said, "We don't know how high they can actually go." The news anchors and the cursory articles we at first receive monarch information through ask how they can go so far. How can they complete this magnificent feat? They're magical in that they are doing a great magic trick right in front of our eyes. But they travel so far because they travel high, mostly soaring on updrafts, in which they can travel long distances, such as a maximum so far measured 134 miles in a day. They have been sighted by a glider up to 11,000 feet in height. How high can they go? Above 500 feet you can't see an object of that size. Over 11,000 feet is the elevation of the eastern monarch's overwintering ground. Around 23,000 feet above ground level is comfortable for a paraglider. At 14,278 feet is Gray's Peak, the highest mountain in the Continental Divide. At 29,032 feet is the top of the highest mountain on Earth. Between 33,000 and 42,000 feet is the typical cruising altitude for commercial planes. At 70,000 feet, spy planes with advanced optics cruise. Above 62 miles, the common line. Weather satellites at 200 miles and the International Space Station at 254 miles above the Earth are continually falling through space. The distance to the Moon is 238,900 miles. To Mars is 108.81 million miles. Another question, what do they think of mountains? We know that they are reticent to cross tall mountains or open water with or without a map, so natural features tend to funnel their known migration. Theoretically, western butterflies could be carried over the eastern side, and east into the western side with supposedly no ill effects. Perhaps, then, the boundaries between east and west are not so high or so solid. How's your kite?
How's yours?
Stop 3, repair station. Foothills, West Sierras. We're sitting here waiting at our station that we've set up in the foothills of the Sierras in the valley of... Supposedly they come here, though we haven't seen any yet. They may not come this way. The route varies every year, depending on uncountable considerations, but including weather events, prevailing winds, esoteric factors. That's a long way of saying that no one knows how their paths change across the land and why. So, unsolicited advice, you have to sow your wildflower seeds wherever and as often as you can. Monarchs can be fragile. While healthy monarchs first emerge with pristine wings over the migration, they can become dulled and torn and damaged. Scratched by anything sharp like thorns and grasses, wind wear from weather, hail and snow and rain, or flying debris from storms, marks from predators. The wings are covered with thousands of tiny flat scales that lose color and are lost over time. I found someone on the internet who repairs their wings with pages from the Bible, which isn't such a bad idea as bad ideas go, though there may be a mismatched weight or hardiness or unforeseen ill effects, particularly for a severely damaged and holy wing. I've also seen people online who fix monarch wings with stickers and feathers and bits of card and old monarch wings they've collected. Really, there's a surprising amount of people online with glue and scissors doing all kinds of emergency surgeries. whatever works. And their love and dedication to the monarch butterfly really is something. The very fine pages of Bibles, also old dictionaries, are a type of paper known as scritter. I'm getting behind this idea for this part of the journey because of the dense symbolism in that very old and violent book, overlaid with the symbolism of it being cut and torn for another being that will fly off with it. So I'm here with some soft white ribbons to gently secure the resting butterfly, and my scissors, and my glue, and my paintbrush, and with this Bible. If any monarchs take me up on the offer, I'm gonna start at the end and work my way back. So any butterflies that stop by will be flying with snips from some fiery passages. Now we're gonna play the audio tour for them again, in case any of them are near. Play the tape! Back to the beginning. Remember that friend who wants to be reincarnated as a jar? Here she is.
I'm Storaistani Zai and I'm from Afghanistan.
What type of butterflies did you have?
Yeah, so for me, I had like different seasonal butterflies, first of all. But I'm from Logar, where it's like kinda south of Kabul, where it's like capital city for Afghanistan. So we have like 4 seasons. But in winter, there's no butterflies. But springtime, right where winter ends, they come out. And then each season has different butterflies. But the spring one was the one that we would use for makeup. So there was like a lot of different colors. So sometimes we would just like be like, oh, like now is the time. And then we would all go for hunting. And I was so good like taking them. And then we would hold them and then take their color and then put it in our eyes to like do the makeup. And then the sharper your makeup was, the more strong you were to catch like more butterflies. And I was making sure that my makeup was like really good. We didn't have a lot to do back home. So we had like all day. We had our breakfast at maybe 6:30 latest. And then from 6:30 to 12 we were free. There was nothing else to do. There's no electricity, there's no technology. So what would happen, we would leave and then my cousins and all other friends would come either to our garden or we would go to theirs. And we had like big gardens too. And then that was it. What should we do today? Let's do makeup. And then it's like, yeah, there's so many butterflies. Okay. And then we just keep doing that like for hours. It's so easy to catch them because there's like hundreds of them. And like if they come, like we had a lot of fields. So there was like a lot of them. I wouldn't do it now though. If I hold the butterfly, I would be like,
I don't think we have enough butterflies.
That's true. What other kind? There was a lot of blue, yellow. Yellow ones were like very tiny. In order for you to do eyeshadow, I'm so embarrassed talking about this. In order for you to do like a complete eyeshadow from them, you had to like catch 5 for one of your eyes. And they're very tiny like this, and they're sharp yellow. And then there's like second one, which is a little bit bigger, and that's the blue one. And that one also has like 2 big dots on them. And those ones were like really big. And sometimes actually there was butterflies that was sparkly, like that had like sparkles in them. And then we would take that one too and we would just put it here on the cheeks to be like, oh look, I got this thing. It was just so stupid. Now that I grew up, I'm like, oh my god, that's like horrible thing to do. But at the time in Afghanistan, no technology, nothing. For us it was fun. We were all having fun. Yeah. And we were like 4-year-old, 6-year-old kids. And it was like, oh, let's go do makeup. And then we would all like catch different ones. It's actually one of my bittersweet memories. I have so much guilt around it.
Oh.
Yeah, but these are my confession for killing butterflies as kid. But I do feel embarrassed, but also it's the truth.
Stop 4. Graveyard. Let's play the tape.
Hello. Welcome to the graveyard. Are you here alive or dead? Press 1 for alive.
I paused at a moment to talk about this stop's offering to the Monarch Trail. Since we're nearing the overwintering sites on the coast, we're well on our way there, and the Monarchs, at this point they've come a long way. They may be battered by wind and weather and enemies. And butterflies need more than just nectar and sun and air. All animals contain salt to maintain their nervous system, which could come from many potential sources. In fact, wherever it's available. Notoriously, butterflies are fond of cow, fresh blood, and corpses. This is part of why we're here in the graveyard.
Pardon?
Not for fresh blood or corpses. For the symbolism.
Oh, okay.
And the salt. So we made 2 small pyramids of salt on either side of the graveyard entry and yonder a little down the road, and ringed them with virulently orange stones. I saw some dead cows on the road in, and that will do for the blood component. Maybe we could do just as much with a line of people sunbathing and perspiring on deck chairs. That's often why butterflies land on people, to lick their salt. But I'll leave that contribution up to everyone's discretion. But back to the tape.
The symbolism of monarchs. Since ancient times, the winged butterfly was a symbol for the human soul. In different cultural manifestations, they were both the soul itself and the souls of the dead. In ancient Egypt, the butterflies were presumably one of the pleasures that awaited the deceased in the afterlife, reflecting the Egyptian belief in the immortality of the soul, Manos Jones. In ancient Greece, they were given the name Psyche by Aristotle, the Greek word for soul. The Aztecs believed that the happy dead, in the form of beautiful butterflies, would visit their relatives to assure them all was well. These butterflies flew around the house and around bouquets of flowers, which were carried by Aztec men of social rank. It was considered ill-mannered to smell a bouquet of flowers from the top. It should always be sniffed from the side, for the top was left for the souls to visit, where they could enjoy the fragrance thus reserved especially for them. Source: native cherry. Native South Americans also integrated various Lepidoptera into their mythologies. To the Guajiro of Colombia, if a particular large white moth is found in a bedroom, it must not be mistreated, for it is the spirit of an ancestor come to visit. If the moth becomes troublesome, it can only be removed with the greatest care, or the spirit may take vengeance. Among the Aymara of Bolivia, a certain rare nocturnal moth was thought to be an omen of death. Source: native cherry. Geoffrey Chaucer, who lived from the 1340s to the year 1400, seems to have held the multicolored insects in somewhat lower esteem. In the Canterbury Tales, disappointed with the depressing tales told by the monk, the host exclaims, "Your tale annoyeth all this company. Such talking is not worth a butterfly." Do I believe these mythologies? Sure, all of it. I think it's best to believe everything unequivocally, simultaneously. We can hold so many measurements of realities within our heads and within our lives. And I think it's not nothing that the scientific name for monarch butterfly is Danius plexippus, meaning sleepy transformation, and milkweed is named Asclepius after the Greek god of healing. Everything means something, and we live in an accumulation of meaning. And I think it's not nothing that when the eastern monarch migration reaches the town below the Ayamel fir forest, where they overwinter, their coming on and during the festival, the Day of the Dead, is celebrated with adulation, fireworks, offerings, painted butterflies, as they are the returning souls of the deceased. Do you believe it? For the radio listeners, the second reason we're in this graveyard is to plant milkweed. As a multitudinous network of available and cared for land across the areas of human settlement, graveyards are a perfect place to re-establish pollinator plants en masse. So we have this packet of common milkweed and pollinator plants for California. Achillea millefolium, sand verbena, common yarrow, desert marigold, owl's clover, California buckwheat, and others. And I hear it's okay for this area. And we've been poking it into pockets between the grass, wherever there's a bit of bare earth that's overturned, so that when the weather warms, pollinator plants will grow and feed the second and third generation monarchs on their way back northeast, and also all the local insects. I'm going to try and get retroactive permission from the cemetery owners. Funny, I hadn't really thought of cemeteries or graveyards having owners before, but of course they do, everything does. Have you seen any butterflies yet?
Not yet. Have you?
No. Not yet. Stop 5. Monarch Sanctuary. This is a recording of the Natural Bridges Monarch Trail in Santa Cruz, California. This grove felt like leftover land in a larger park, but the sloping canyon made a microclimate protected from the wind. It's hard to describe what it felt like to be there, watching the shredded paper hanging from bunches of vines and clustered on the eucalyptus trees, waiting for them to burst out as monarchs. The anticipation of transformation. Every so often one that would be circling and floating among the treetops would land in the clusters, and you would see a ripple of color spreading from it as each opened and closed their wings, waiting for the swell of heat to touch them. Then you look up, more up, crick your neck at the canopy between the trees and see countless orange wings soaring and crossing the sky. The physical state they are in while overwintering is rest. Sometimes western monarchs fly around as the weather allows, but they have already consumed enough nectar to survive on their fat and lipid reserves. Once they wake and reproduce, the females begin the migration back east. This long-lived overwintering generation will go to Salinas and the beginning of the Central Valley to lay their eggs in the new spring milkweed, and there they will finally die. The next generation, born in Salinas and only living a few weeks, will fly to the other side of the Central Valley, into the foothills of the Sierras to lay their eggs and die. The generation after that crossed the Sierras and dispersed east of Tahoe and the mountains, and through Nevada, Idaho, and Oregon, north and into the foothills of the Rockies. And then once it's autumn, they begin again, and the next migratory generation that lives 8 months will start back towards their overwintering ground. The offering here is, well, a walkway is already built and crowds gather that tiptoe in and out all day. The crowds are asked to be quiet and to not disturb the monarchs, other than the clump of their boots down the wooden walkway, and remarkably they do that. They descend in a hush. No dogs are allowed, as monarchs can hear loud, sudden noises and have a startled response. It's a reverent opposite of the fireworks and celebration in Zitácuaro of the eastern monarchs reaching their overwintering sites. But there are less western monarchs. Far, far less. In at least one year, 2019, their count was fewer than 2,000. They were thought by some to have entered an extinction vortex. But then the next year came a surprise.
So, I also read that the western monarchs have entered an extinction vortex. Do you think that's true?
Dr. Chip Taylor again.
It's absolutely not true. In the fall before this last one, they only had 1,800 butterflies counted at all the overwintering sites. And there were a whole lot of articles saying it's doomed. I thought the whole population was doomed. I thought everything was going to fall to pieces, and they were much below the extinction threshold. I mean, there's no way 1,800 butterflies can sustain the population, because 1,800 butterflies, a lot of them die during the winter. Only about 45% of them are female. A lot of those would die. You'd come out of the winter with, say, 400 female butterflies to reestablish the population. How could you possibly do that? And then, that fall that followed that, 247,000 monarchs were counted at the overwintering sites. 247,000. There's no way that 400 surviving females could produce 247,000 butterflies. The problem here is that we didn't know where they were. They may have counted 1,800, but there had to be 20 or 30 or 40,000 butterflies that actually overwintered, because the demography is such that the only way you can get 247,000 butterflies is for tens of thousands of females to actually have survived the winter. The question then is, where were they if they didn't count them? And so then I went through the possibilities of where they were in the mountains that people never saw them. And there are possibilities that they were overwintering in small clusters, places where nobody observed them. Now, I'm sure that there are complaints about this point of view, but the fact is nobody has an alternative point of view.
So, the sites are shifting. Permanence is showing itself to be slow impermanence.
I point out that the butterflies are disappearing from the 5 southern counties. So you go from San Diego to Ventura, and the number of butterflies overwintering in those counties has steadily declined. The simple reason is that the temperature is increasing in those counties at the overwintering site. The butterflies are really on the move a lot more in the west than they are in Mexico. In Mexico, there are kind of islands of concentrations of butterflies, and they stay in those islands through the winter. Really don't move a lot among sites. It's too cold to move very far, and there's no need to. But with the west, especially as the temperatures are increasing, it appears that the butterflies have to keep moving in order to keep their body temperatures low enough so they don't become reproductive. So there's a real critical temperature here that we don't fully understand. If the butterflies get too much in the way of high temperatures, it turns on the reproductive system, and they become reproductive, they mate, and if there are no milkweeds to lay eggs on, their metabolism has increased at that point, and they're much more likely to die before they actually succeed in reproducing. Monarchs that's passed their genes on the best seem to be the butterflies that successfully overwinter in a non-reproductive condition. And in order to do that, they have to keep moving to find places that are colder and colder. I mean, they're big gaps in what we know about what's going on in the West, especially in these winters now, because the winters now are so much warmer than they were in the past, that it seems to be changing the behavior.
I believe that we are and continue to be hooked by the monarch migration because it is in a way unimaginable to us. Personally, as we are well removed from any regular repeating seasonal migrations of our pre-agrarian past, and collectively from the loss of natural migration routes with the modern world. The skies are no longer darkened by passenger pigeons in the spring. Herds of millions of bison no longer move south in the fall, re-engineering the grasslands in their vast wake. We hear only of the diminishment of salmon migrations upstream. We have to look harder for the remaining North Atlantic humpback whales that migrate between polar feeding grounds and warm winter breeding grounds, and harder for the warblers, thrushes, vireos, orioles, flycatchers, tanagers, and grosbeaks, as North America seems to steadily empty of migratory songbirds. Each disappearing act comes with a cascade of consequences, both visible and invisible to us. The witnessing of mass migration, many of them, were once inextricably tied to seasons and woven into innumerable ecosystems, whether quiet movements or involving the darkening of the sky with uncountable butterflies on an updraft. Maybe in the migration they are something completely mundane, but we feel that unignorable sense that, to quote Chip Taylor, to lose something like this migration is to diminish us all. Now I think that this is why I'm doing all this, that trying to discover ways that the migration and the seasonal change it heralds can be part of the everyday imbues both it and usual life with necessary observance, celebration, and ritual. Something it already has that I am determined to feel more keenly, more viscerally, right up against my skin. Since butterflies are electrical signals, we can pass on electrical signals to them. So here we are offering what already exists, a walk of adulation. Well, that about wraps it up. Ladies of the earth and air, and all listeners out there. We're back at the River Fork Ranch in the Carson Valley, where we started out, to celebrate the last butterflies that flew over the Sierras this year, to farewell this effort of preparation, and to finally farewell the last of the color of 3 seasons. When we take an accounting of everything we've lost, every animal one by one, and when we fix those direct causes, it's kind of like medieval medicine, treating each symptom as a distinct disease, not as part of a whole. Even if we fix one symptom and then take another accounting, what then? In the meantime, what have we lost? Invisible or quiet or ugly losses, As the coastal Pacific currents warm, and the coastal forests heat, and the dwindling western monarchs have to head further and further north to overwinter through pesticides, heat, and smoke. Perhaps there's nothing I can personally do to support the migration, and all the Rube Goldberg machines, cloaks, seed cannons, and shrieking at butterflies are counterproductive. But pilgrimages like this, celebrations, I like because they have a different purpose. My faith is tangible in the works I make. Maybe my work should pay more mind to efficiency or effectiveness. Less Rube Goldberg machines and costumes. More calling graveyards to plant milkweed, or connecting with other causes like river restoration, since monarchs tend to follow riparian corridors. Or calling members of Congress, because maybe nothing we do accumulates to anything, but at the same time, the stunning paradox is that we are all necessary. Seems like a last resort, but maybe something can only be true if you believe it sincerely, with no qualms and quibbles. Something between all these efforts we'll have to do for now. Goodbye, butterflies. Goodbye, Jaws.
This guest episode features the voices of Eleanor Quall, Phil Corbett, Laurie Leonard, Chip Taylor, and Starai Stanizai, with music by Theo Rasmussen, Corey Maccabee, and Eleanor Quall, and was produced by Eleanor Quall. If you'd like to see pictures of all the pilgrimage offerings from each stop, you can find them at thewind.org/episodes/the-Mary-Monarchs, along with a complete list of citations, plus the original, unabridged, 2-part version of this episode, where the tour makes an additional stop in space. Thanks to Eleanor, Phil, and you. Safe travels.